I'm Leilani Farha, the UN Special Rapporteur on the Right to Housing. I'm so sorry I'm unable to be in Hong Kong with you at the Confronting Inequality and Social Exclusion in Hong Kong conference, but I'm happy to provide you with some comments via video message. Violations of the right to adequate housing are some of the most pressing issues facing cities around the world today. Hong Kong's experiences are really not actually unique, though they may be quite extreme. Everywhere I go as Special Rapporteur, every city I travel to, I see the same pattern over and over, which is the unaffordability of housing is creating homelessness in growing numbers. We're seeing a big increase in the number and size of informal settlements. People are being evicted in larger numbers, and there is no social safety net for people, and it's causing incredible harm. And of course, when we ask ourselves, like, who is most affected by this, it's always the most vulnerable groups. So it's people living in poverty, older people, LGBT, refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, persons with disabilities, and young people. I am concerned to learn some of the statistics of what's happening in Hong Kong. I've read in terms of unaffordability that the mortgage to income ratio in 2018 was up in the mid 70%. There is no rent control in place, as I understand it. And I'm concerned that families who are trying to own houses would have to actually save and not spend a penny for 21 years before they might actually be able to own a home. That's according to one study. And so, of course, when I hear those statistics and when I think about who is being left behind, again, it's always the most vulnerable and marginalized groups. And that is, of course, a human rights concern. That moves us into the arena of social exclusion, inequality, and discrimination, which are obviously serious human rights concerns. What I notice is that housing is both a driver of inequality as well as symptomatic of inequality. The question is, of course, what do we do with such situations? As rapporteur, I wrote a report on human rights-based housing strategies. It's my belief that the only way we're going to solve what I'm seeing worldwide and what seems to be occurring in Hong Kong is if we have a paradigmatic shift. We have to stop viewing housing as something to invest in, as a way to make profits, as a way to grow wealth, as a place to park capital. And we have to start understanding housing as a social good and as a human right. And so human rights-based housing strategies adopted by different levels of government would move us in that direction. Now, what would be contained in a human rights-based housing strategy? The first thing is that there have to be measurable goals and timelines. So, for example, governments need to commit to ending homelessness, and they need to commit to ending it by 2030 in keeping with the Sustainable Development Goals. It has to be seen and understood as a priority and an urgent issue. The government might adopt a number of social housing units that it intends to build by a certain period of time, and it needs to meet those commitments. We also say that in order for housing to be understood and recognized as a human right, it should appear in legislation. So there should be a legislated right to housing. There are a number of other principles that would have to be very much part of a rights-based housing strategy, and at the center of that would be recognition of discrimination in housing and the need to strive for equality in housing on an urgent and immediate basis, and equality for those vulnerable groups that are being left behind. And lastly, I'll add, it's very important that rights-based housing strategies address the role of private actors in housing and really understand the need to regulate those actors to ensure that those actors are not violating the right to housing. And that's government's job. Governments should be regulating and should be ensuring that private actors are actually implementing the right to adequate housing rather than making the right to adequate housing less achievable for vulnerable populations. So I'm going to leave my comments there. I do hope that this contributes to your discussion, and I wish you all the best as you move forward. Thanks.